So I built the record. The way I'd built records for strangers for 8 years. Except this one was mine. I drove 2 towns over to Howard Pruitt's office, an old storefront firm with good light, and a secretary who'd been there 40 years. Pruitt remembered Opal the moment I said her name. "Sharpest woman who ever sat in that chair," he said. He pulled the file himself. Inside was everything a careful lawyer keeps, his contemporaneous notes from the day Opal signed, recording that he'd met with her alone, that he'd confirmed she understood the deed, the life estate, the remainder, and the fact that she could not later undo it without my agreement. There was his signed attestation of her capacity, dated the same day as the deed, 6 years back. Lawyers who do this work write document capacity precisely because someday someone shows up claiming there wasn't any. Pruitt had done it right. I laid it all out on my own kitchen table that night, side by side. The recorded deed, public, stamped, undeniable. Pruitt's capacity attestation from the day of signing, Dr. Voss's recent cognitive screening, the long one, dated and clean. The investigator's report calling her alert and capable. The property tax records showing the life estate had been honored by the county for 6 straight years. Every single document my parents would need to be afraid of, my grandmother had already made sure existed, years before they ever reached for her house. She hadn't left me a treasure to stumble onto. She'd left me an argument, fully assembled, needing only someone willing to carry it into a courtroom. I was willing. I made a fresh pot of tea at midnight, the way she taught me, and I read it all one more time. We were ready. The hearing was on a Thursday morning, in a small wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of floor wax and old paper. It wasn't a jury, just a probate judge, the 2 lawyers, the court investigator, my grandmother, and, in the gallery, a scatter of relatives who'd heard there was a fight and come to watch a family come apart. Opal wore her good blue dress and sat straight in the chair. My parents' attorney went first. He was smooth. He talked about a grieving widow, vulnerable in her loss, and a granddaughter who worked in a law office and had access and motive. He never quite said I'd manipulated her. He just left the shape of it hanging in the air for the judge to fill in. Then my mother took the stand, and she did the thing they'd planned. "She isn't capable," my mother said, her voice trembling with what looked, from a distance, like concern. "She hasn't been for years. She gets confused. She forgets. Someone in her condition can't have understood a legal document. She was good. If you didn't know my grandmother, you might have believed her. But our side didn't argue. Our side just opened the folder. Howard Pruitt, who'd agreed to come testify though he was long retired, took the stand and produced his file. He read his own capacity attestation from the day of signing into the record, in his dry, careful lawyer's voice. He described meeting Opal alone, 6 years ago, confirming she understood every word. Then Dr. Voss's recent screening went in, the long cognitive test, dated and signed. Every answer perfect. Then the investigator's report, alert and oriented and entirely capable. The judge listened to all of it with no expression, the way good judges do. And then, he did something I didn't expect. He turned to my grandmother directly and asked her, in her own words, to tell him what she'd done 6 years ago, and why. He wanted to hear her. And my grandmother, 89 years old, folded her hands on the rail and began to speak. She didn't ramble. She didn't plead. She spoke in short, clean sentences, one after another, the way she poured tea. "My husband died in the spring. I was 83. I went to Mr. Pruitt because I'd watched money turn good families ugly, and I didn't want mine to be next. I deeded my house, and kept the right to live in it until I die. I gave the rest to my granddaughter Serena, because she's the only one who ever came to see me, and not the square footage. I knew exactly what I was doing. I have known every day since." She looked at the judge. "I'm not confused, Your Honor. I'm just old. People mistake the two on purpose when it's convenient." The courtroom was completely silent. The judge looked down at the stack of documents, the attestation, the screening, the investigator's report. All of it pointing the same direction, and he asked my parents' attorney whether he had any evidence of incapacity beyond his client's testimony. The attorney did not. Because there wasn't any. That's when my mother lost the calm she'd worn so carefully. It happened in the hallway after, but it happened in front of everyone. The relatives, the clerk, the lawyers filing out. "After everything I did for that woman," she said, her voice climbing toward a shriek. "I gave that woman years of my life, her errands, her appointments, her weekends, And this is what I get. People turned. My mother had finally raised her voice in a building full of witnesses, and it made her smaller, not larger. I stood very still in the middle of it and didn't raise mine at all. You drove her to appointments, I said, quietly enough that people leaned in to hear it. She drove herself to a lawyer. My mother had no answer for that. Behind us, the judge's ruling was already entered. The petition for guardianship was denied. The deed and the life estate stood. My grandmother's mind was her own. Bring me the blue folder, she'd said. She had kept herself, all along. In the gallery after, my father did the same thing he'd done at the kitchen table. He sat down. He found a bench at the back of that emptying courtroom and lowered himself onto it like a man whose strings had been cut, and he put his face in his hands. Nobody had asked him to sit. His body just did it, twice now, the same surrender in the same week. Derek had already slipped out a side door before the ruling was even read, the way he always left right before a bill came due. My mother stood in the hallway with no one left to perform for, gathered her coat with sharp little movements, and walked out to the parking lot alone. My grandmother, meanwhile, stood up from her chair without help, smoothed her good blue dress, and took my arm. Not because she needed to lean on me, but because that's what you do with someone you love when the hard part is finally over. Well, she said as we came down the courthouse steps into the sun. That's enough excitement for an old woman. I asked if she'd been afraid up there, with her own son's lawyer calling her confused. She thought about it. A little, she admitted. But I'd written the truth down years ago, for exactly this day, so all I had to do today was read it back. She patted my hand. Now, let's go home and have our tea. The for sale sign came out of Earl's grass the following Monday. Cindy the realtor pulled the listing without a word. There was nothing to sell. There never had been. And I think she'd suspected it for a while. My father did lose his house, but not to my grandmother, and not to me. He lost it to the bank he'd been hiding from, to the second refinance and the defaulted contract, and a decade of decisions that had nothing to do with Wexler Road. He and my mother moved into a rental apartment across the county. I heard about it secondhand. We don't talk much now. I won't pretend that doesn't ache, some nights, because it does. You can know you did right and still grieve the family you had before you had to. Derek lost the truck. The promised cut never came, because there was never anything to cut, and he drifted off to whatever low spot came next. My mother never apologized, and I've stopped waiting for it. Apologies are for people who think they were wrong, and she still believes, I'm sure, that she was being practical, that I was the one who made it ugly. I've made my peace with being the one she blames. Here is what I kept. I kept my grandmother. Opal still lives at the end of Wexler Road, in the house Earl built a 1/4 inch out of true, and she will live there until her last day, because the law she arranged 6 years ago says so, and because no one can reach it now. I'm her remainder man. The house comes to me after, but neither of us is in any hurry about that. I come by every week, same as always, and the porch light is always on before I reach the steps. We sit. She pours. The spoon makes that small, clean sound against the china, and it doesn't mean anything dramatic anymore. It just means tea, and a Tuesday, and a woman who kept her own mind in a folder until the day the world tried to tell her she'd lost it. The blue folder is back in the cabinet under the window. The corners are still soft from handling. I have the brass key on my ring, where she told me to keep it, and I touch it sometimes without meaning to, a small warm weight, and I remember that the quietest person at the table is very often the one who saw the whole game first. My grandmother never raised her voice once through any of it. She just made sure that on the day she'd need the truth was already written down, dated, and waiting for someone to carry it into the light. That's my story. A teacup, a porch light, and one blue folder she filled 6 years before anyone tried to take her home. If this reminded you to ask the people you love what they actually want before someone else decides it for them, take that as your sign and do it this week. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.